The Joe Rogan Experience.
You know, there were periods of time in our history where people would steal our religious objects and our sacred items. They still do, and loot our graves. There's a law called the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act that was meant to repatriate those stolen items and those stolen ancestors back to tribes so that we could help with our cultural revitalization as well as put our ancestors back to rest. There are still at least 200,000 ancestors in boxes in museums.
Jesus.
That's just in the U.S.
200,000 in museums in the U.S.
Just in the U.S. So our ancestors and our cultural items and religious objects have also been taken all around the world.
Imagine if it was French people. It was 200,000 French people in boxes in museums in the U.S.
And France is one of the worst. So there was just a case recently. French loved to auction our sacred objects for some reason. There was a sacred shield of the Pueblo of Acoma in about 2016 that was being sold at auction in France. And the tribe, the Pueblo, fought and even went to court in France to try to stop that auction and get that item back because there was evidence that it had been stolen in contemporary times. And France said, you don't have standing in our courts. So even though they're considered a sovereign or a pseudo-sovereign nation here in the United States, we didn't have standing in the French court and couldn't protect that item this way. So we had to use other means of negotiation and arm twisting. That item has finally been repatriated, but it took about 4 years for that to happen.
So it's finally been brought back.
Yeah, but that's just one case. This happens.
Where is it now?
It's back home at the Acoma Pueblo.
And do they have it on display, or is it?
No, this is a sacred object.
It can't be on display.
Right. These are items that are used for religious purposes. They're protected sacred items. And the association, we were fighting with the Metropolitan Museum of Art last year and the year before because they were displaying items from a private collection that were sacred. One item was even a funerary object, was an item that is never supposed to be seen because it's buried with the ancestor. And it was on display. And without any kind of consultation with the tribes affected, it's horrendous the way we still look at Indian people and our cultures and our practices today. We're still being called heathens. There was an article, I think just last week, there was a religious man saying that we're heathens because we the sage that I gave you, because we burn sage as one of our medicinal and spiritual practices.
That was the reason why they were calling you heathens?
Yeah, and this was just in an article last week from a Christian group.
Oh, well.
Yeah, well.
I'm a heathen too to them.
Yes,
we're all heathens.
Yes. What's interesting in these states like Indiana and Ohio, where indigenous peoples have just been removed wholeheartedly, is that tons of archaeologists and other people that like to loot, they have taken so many things out of the ground. There was a case that the FBI actually got a hold of in Indiana, a gentleman by the name of Don Miller, who had a huge ranch house and farm, and it was just full of Native American artifacts, including human remains, and there were even items from other countries that he had looted and taken. And the FBI actually investigated that, and because the man was like 90 years old, they didn't prosecute him, but they were able to take back those items, and through that Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, they've been consulting with tribes to repatriate those items back. But that looting and collecting in areas like Indiana and Ohio and
Jimmy
other places,
actually has it up on the screen here.
Oh, yeah, here it
FBI
is.
finds 2,000 human bones among antiquities seized from man's home. So where did this gentleman get all this stuff? His collection was Native American, including the bone. Tim Carpenter of the FBI told media outlets
Yeah,
that
there
half
it is.
Miller reportedly admitted he'd conducted illegal digging expeditions, but he never faced criminal charges before his death in 2015.
Right.
So this guy was just digging stuff up and just showing it around his house. And there were rules against this?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And
so if it's on land that, say, what if he owns a ranch? How does that work? Like if you're
So it's dependent. And a lot of the things that he had, it wasn't clear where he had got it from. He didn't even know or remember or keep any records of where he got a lot of the items. So our laws are really screwy with this too. So federal and tribal lands are protected. So public lands, parks, and tribal lands are protected lands. You can't go and dig in federal or tribal lands without a permit, among other things. But just in state private lands, it's really dependent on what the state laws are, and it's really inconsistent whether those whether looting is protected or not.
And so that's where it's interesting, because there's a lot of gigantic ranches in Texas that are privately owned that were originally Native American hunting grounds. There's ones that a friend of mine has hunted on that they have these pictographs. You go inside these caves, and this is on private land. Someone owns this. You go inside these caves, and there's ancient artwork all over the walls of the cave. And signs of fire, like soot on the ceiling of the cave where they lit campfires. Like this should probably be some sort of a historical site.
Right, and it's usually not protected, and people get real angry when Indians try to get involved in where there may be development that will have an effect on a burial site, a sacred site, or other type of site. People really get angry, and so it's really hard for tribes to work to protect these areas, work to learn about what the areas are even about. There's been so much amateur archaeology, and this whole country was founded on amateur archaeology. Let's dig up, look at what we found in this grave. Everyone was looking for gold and other special things, and oftentimes they just took whatever was in the grave and created the antiquities art market, which still is all over the world today. So the association is constantly looking at auctions and trying to return items that private collectors have obtained improperly. We just got a human vertebra removed from a U.S. auction just a couple of weeks ago. They were selling it because they said it had an arrow point still in, so that has value in some markets.
And they had done DNA on this to prove that
they were selling it as a Native American vertebra. It was from a collector in Massachusetts.
Well, how could they prove that it wasn't just a settler that was killed by an arrow?
Right. I don't know. And
So
that's the thing about trying to work with auctions and private collectors is they often don't want to work with us because they're trying to make money. So oftentimes items, whether they're religious objects or human remains, they have a story or what's called a provenance associated with them that is often made up to drive the price of the item. So whether that was a legitimate vertebra of a Native American, we don't know because we can't get that collector to talk to us.
So the collector's under no obligation by law to talk to you?
No, that's why we try to send the FBI and our friend Tim Carpenter to them.
So how would they determine? I mean, wouldn't they have to do a DNA analysis of the bones and try to figure out where who the person was?
Well, the DNA analysis isn't necessarily going to tell you where it came from. It could tell you that it was Native American.
Would they even be able to get that out of bones?
I don't know,
I don't know.
not a scientist, but there was a case really not that long ago called the Kennewick Man case. I don't know if maybe you heard of it, but it was an ancestor was uncovered in the state of Washington, and he was old, and the universities involved in the Army Corps who had possession of it were going to repatriate it to appropriate tribes. And what ended up happening is that academia stepped up and said, hey, wait, this isn't Native American. We think he's something else. And for years, Native Americans fought to get that ancestor, the ancient one, back. And finally, after a court case that deemed the ancestor wasn't Native American, DNA test was done, and it was indeed Native American, and the ancestor was finally repatriated.
Can I ask you how that works? So,
yeah.
Listen, you said there's 500 recognized tribes, many more that are unrecognized. Mm-hmm. Who would that go to?
Right. So,
like, say if you won and it's brought back and given to Native Americans, to who and to where?
Right. So let's look at the best case scenario. In a lot of museums have maintained records that may have human remains and associated funerary objects, and have enough information to know where that came from, what site it was located at, what county, what state. And we know from tribal histories as well as federal U.S. Documentation that area was likely affiliated with this tribe or that tribe, or maybe several tribes. And so consultation occurs under that law about those ancestral remains and funerary objects, and it's determined where those items should go back. In the worst case scenario, where there's not any information, oftentimes evidence of who were the collectors that were giving to that institution? What has been the history of the institution, and where has it obtained different collections? And through that, it's deduced who may be affiliated with those items or the ancestors. So it can be a pretty long, drawn-out process. But what's interesting about it is museums and other institutions fought this law for a long time. And they said, well, all of our collections will, we won't be able to fulfill our purpose as a museum or an academic institution to study these things. It's like, well, hell, you haven't studied it in 100 years.
They haven't?
Yeah, no. Most of these, when people work to consult with museums, most of these items are in boxes and often poorly managed and maintained.
So they're just sitting somewhere in storage.
Right.
So the museum owns it and they're kind of hoarding it?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So this Kennewick Man, can you pull up some information about that,
I'm reading a
Champ?
story about it right now.
Yeah, great, because I'm forgetting my dates when that happened.
Yeah, I'm very curious what the dates would be. Now, when we're talking about Native Americans, do you agree with the idea? Okay, let's see here. Kennewick Man finally is free.
They did so much study
Human
on him.
skeleton ever found in North America. He's a handsome fellow. Let me see that picture. Looks normal. Imagine you just ran into that guy at 7-Eleven. You're like, what's up, bro? Looks like
He's like, hey,
a modern American, a modern human, I should say. That's the bones, Ferris bones. Oh, wow, his rib bones. So does it give us a date on his, what they have? Go to that picture of the teeth again. That's crazy.
So just let me tell you that looking at human remains for many tribal peoples is difficult. It's like looking at a naked body. I mean, it's the essence of someone that we shouldn't be seeing.
Oh, so you shouldn't be seeing even these images?
That should have been in the ground. That should have gone and disappeared. It had a journey. It got interrupted, and some tribes and cultures believe that that's harmful to interact or look at, or just a little bit humiliating. It's exposed, right? So
seeing them on display in a museum is particularly offensive.
Oh God, yeah. And at least in the United States, you won't find that in any kind of public museum. Now, you might in some kind of private institution or private collection.
You do with mummies, right? But with Native American people, they've decided that that's offensive to the culture, so they've removed it. Is that what you're saying?
Well, that's also happening. You're finding in other countries who, in Egypt, for example, and in other cultures, that they're trying to get those back, too.
Well, imagine if there was a museum where you can go and look at Ronald Reagan's head. Right?
Some people would probably enjoy that.
For sure, I'd go. But it is one of those things where it's like, oh, okay, I kind of get it, right? So if you have the bones of Sitting Bull on display in some sort of a plexiglass case in a museum, and people are like, oh, wow, that's cool. Okay, would that be cool if that was Ronald Reagan? Would that be cool if that was someone from our lifetime that died? What if they had Janis Joplin's head, in a box somewhere, and you can go stare at it? Wouldn't that weird you out? Yes. Or how about Amy Winehouse? How about someone who died? Yeah, see what I'm saying? Yeah. Someone who died really recently. It'd be like, what are you doing? Well, and maybe we need to look at it that way.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing, is that we don't seem to look at Native people in that way. We don't seem to go, oh, that's not okay. Oh, it's not okay to outlaw their religion. Well, how would I feel if someone did that to me, right?
Right.
It's a double standard, or I don't know what you call it, but it's just racism?
Yeah, in a way. Racism is the right word.